The world of mobile app development has come a long way since the days of Palm Pilots and Blackberries. And although the tools available to developers have become increasingly more usable and intelligent as operating systems and form factors have expanded, the challenges of managing all the working parts of a robust mobile solution, such as storage, authentication, latency, broadcast and targeted notifications, and scalability, still very much exist. As a response to these industry and developer challenges, services for rapid mobile development have become prolific, and yet no single service has found the perfect balance between manageability and power until now. Azure mobile apps make it easy to build cross-platform solutions, plain and simple. Up until now, pieces of the Azure mobile app concept existed in Azure in separate pieces. You may have an Azure mobile service that exists in one container. You may have apps and authentication that are happening at a different level. And most developers found this process fairly cumbersome. And quite honestly, most developers used the legacy Azure mobile services simply to get push notifications easily into their app, as well as sometimes leveraging very simple data structures. The great thing about Azure mobile apps is they're part of the Azure App Service concept, meaning that they are able to inherit all of the blessings and benefits of an Azure App Service, including seamless integration with data stores, authentication, social integration, push notifications, and easy scalability. Mobile apps are part of the new Web plus Mobile suite of Azure App Services. Mobile app management is not available via the classic Azure portal. The most that you can do at this point is take a legacy Azure mobile service and upgrade it to a mobile app. And in general, we create and manage mobile apps in either the Azure Management Portal or Visual Studio 2015. There are some other tools that make it easy to develop the clients themselves, your mobile app clients, but most Azure mobile app development is going to happen in Visual Studio with some management happening in the Azure Management Portal. So let's flip over to Visual Studio 2015 and create a couple of quick mobile apps. So we're over here in Visual Studio 2015, and we're going to look at a couple of different ways that we can create an Azure mobile app. And I'm going to make some suggestions, observations, and recommendations along the way. If you're a .NET developer already, your first instinct would probably be to create a mobile app from Visual Studio. Let's walk through that process. Let me point out a couple of things that are different if you do it through Visual Studio that you can compare to some of the different methods doing it directly from the portal. So we're just going to select an ASP.NET web application. We'll select web application there. We'll say OK. And then we're going to select the Azure mobile app template. A couple things to notice here. Web API is selected by default, and the ability to change that is disabled. Authentication is totally disabled as well. And again, this is because Azure App Services are designed to have their authentication managed for the service itself through the portal. We can override this. There's things we can do with it. But the best practice is to allow the app service itself to manage authentication. App service is selected, host in the cloud. We'll say OK. Since we're going to delete this, we'll just keep this web application name here. We'll select the Office Point Resources resource group, and we'll say create. Just wait a second while that mobile app gets created for us. And there we go. So our mobile app's been created, and all of the raw structure for an Azure mobile app has been added to the solution for us. Okay, so keep that in mind. So we've created this application. Let's go ahead and publish it out there just so that we can talk about some of the differences and recommendations. We'll just say publish. We'll put that out there. Publishing process is just the same as if this were any other app service. This will take a minute to publish, and we'll know it's successful when it loads up a default mobile app web page in our default browser. And there we go. So if we see this, we know that our mobile app is up and running, and some developers look at this and say, this doesn't really look like a mobile app. What do I do? So you could click on this all day long, and that's about it, and this bright idea will come on. But if you were to go browse this on your phone or your mobile device, it would just be this page. There's nothing else going on. Remember, this is the back end. The mobile app service is running. So it says the mobile app is up and running, but really it's the mobile app back-end service that's up and running. So let's flip over to the Azure portal and take a look at what gets created and a couple of things of note over there. So if I search for that mobile app that was created, one thing I want to draw your attention to, this is going to look structurally in this blade like any other Azure app service, but under app deployment, if you click on the quick start blade, it's got these get free tools, publish your app, learn more with this information. This is all nice, this is all helpful, but unless you're an absolute pro and know every single thing that you're going to do, there's some ways that you can speed up and expedite your development process that don't show up if you create a mobile app from Visual Studio. So let's create a mobile app from the portal. We'll say New, Web and Mobile, and we'll select Mobile App here. Let's just call this one Office Point 2345. And we'll select an existing resource group. And I'm going to turn App Insights off since I know we're going to just delete this, and I'll say OK. We'll wait a second while that mobile app backend gets created for us. Now if we go into All Resources and search for Office, we see this mobile app Office 234 that gets created. But now let's take a look under app development what it looks like in the quick start blade this direction. So now instead of having just helpful information here, we have all of these client app front-end templates created for us. So even if we're an Objective-C, Swift, Android developer, C#, even Cordova, whatever we are, we can just select what our front-end client target will be, and we can use this quick start to create all the pieces and the raw skeleton for us. So the first thing we'll want to do is connect to a database. So we'll say database, no connections, we'll add a connection, we'll just go to the blade, we can just select our database, we can just put in the credentials for that connection. We'll say OK. It's going to take a second for that to connect, validate, and refresh. We'll just wait for that to show up. Great, there we go. So if we were to select C#, notice that this selection goes away here. If we select Node.js, this is available. And what this will do is actually create the to-do item table for us in our easy tables. So I'm going to say create to-do item table. I'm actually going to go back to that mobile app, and let's now scroll down to the easy tables. And you'll notice how we have this to-do item table that gets created for us, and there we have a structure. And we could add tables all day here. We could say important stuff and add a table, give all kinds of permissions. We can select that and we can manage the schema and add fields. We can really do whatever we want. This is a great scenario for very lightweight data that doesn't have relationships, that you don't need to really draw on the power of Entity Framework or the power of SQL Server. Although this data is really stored in a way that is similar to the way that you would set it up, it's really just for lightweight scenarios to make it easy, which is why it's called an easy table. So the cool thing about creating a solution through the portal with the quick start is if we select a C# solution, we can download an entire solution for our mobile app backend that's already prepared for us and already connected. And then we can also create a client app that consumes our mobile app service so that we have a great starting point. We know that all the connections, all of the authentication information, URLs into our mobile backend are correct. So let's take a look at doing that for real. Let's create a new solution here that we're not going to delete. We'll say New, Web and Mobile. And now let's create Office Point Mobile. Everything that we're doing in this entire series is based off the concepts from the Office Point solution. We'll turn off App Insights. We can connect that later, and we'll say Create. Take a second while we wait for that to get created. Go to All Resources, search for Office Point, and there we've got Office Point Mobile that was created for us. And for this solution, we're not even going to worry about easy tables or easy APIs. Those are great for lightweight scenarios, but it's a lot more fun if we do it ourselves. We'll wait for that quick start list to load. We'll go ahead and select a Windows C# application. We'll connect again to our database. Select that Office Point database. And we'll add the credentials. We'll wait for that to authenticate and refresh and show up for us in our data connections. Okay, but now this time we're actually going to just select C# and download this entire solution. And to clarify what this is going to do, this is going to download a zip that's our entire back-end Visual Studio solution. And then we're going to download a zip file that's our entire front-end client solution that will consume our back-end. So let's download that first one. We'll say extract all, and we'll just send that to documents, and we'll move that into our projects folder a little bit later. Great. And now make sure you have create a new app selected here. If you connect to an existing app, that's just going to give you a couple of code snippets so that you can connect an existing app. And that's definitely appropriate if you already have an app created. But since we don't, I'll say create a new app, download. This is going to download a zip file that has our entire project already connected and configured for us. So we'll say extract. We'll pull that up. Great. So let's go ahead and take those two projects. We'll say cut, and we'll put them in our projects folder for Visual Studio. Paste. There we go. And let's open up our runtime solution first here. Take a look at it. When you download these pre-created projects, the first thing that you should do just as a best practice is to right-click over the solution and say restore the NuGet packages. Depending on the version that you're running, you may have some packages that need to be restored. And then go ahead and run a build. And then I also like to run a publish on it. The first time I publish, I like to make sure that the publishing target is set correctly. So we've got Microsoft Azure App Service. Remember, we don't even have to pull in a publishing profile anymore. I can just select Office Point Mobile and say OK. You'll notice that it fills in the connections for us, and we'll talk about our connection strings a little bit later. And then I'll just say publish. And again, we'll know that this is successful in being published when we see it load up in our default browser as that semi-misleading "your mobile app is running" page. So there we go. That's been published, and it's now out and available at officepointmobile.azurewebsites.net. So that's great. Let's open up our Office Point Mobile solution now. We'll say Projects, Office Point Mobile, and we'll open up our Windows Store C# solution. We'll say OK. And again, we'll do a NuGet restore when we first grab it. One other thing I like to do, these templates by default are usually targeting the oldest version of Windows 10 possible. I like to move the target version to my most recent, which is, in this example, Anniversary Edition. When that reloads, I'll do a rebuild. And so we now have a fully functioning Azure mobile app backend and an Azure mobile app or client app. Let's deploy it here to our local host. We should have a fully functioning mobile app that's using the Azure mobile backend. And there we go. So in order to test it, first we should see, go ahead and say new to do, and we'll say save. And there we have a new to do that gets added. Another to do. think I'd spell that correctly. We'll say save. Great. And so even if we mark these complete by checking them, they're just going to go away. So all fully functioning using our Azure backend and using our mobile app front-end client. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So let's go back over to the slide deck and talk a little bit more about what kind of things we can do with Azure mobile apps. Authentication and authorization in the app world can get fairly complicated, especially with the introduction of third-party services and OAuth token flows. The authentication process must start with a client app. The client app obtains tokens and passes those tokens to the mobile app backend service. So it's important that we leverage app service authentication settings for the backend, but the initiation of that process always starts with the client.
And we're going to look at the role that Traffic Manager plays. Well, let's say I've got an application deployed across 2 Azure data centers, East and West. Okay, very simple. And maybe we've also got Europe, EU. So I've got East, Europe, and I've got West. And in there, I've deployed an identical application. For the purpose of Traffic Manager, the details of the application are really irrelevant. For example, Europe, it could be a single web server connecting to a single database because I don't have that many customers. East US, it might be a scale set with 25 servers connecting to a distributed database because I have a lot of customers. And West might be a load balancer that's in front of 3 web servers. So the individual, within the region implementations kind of are irrelevant as long as what they're surfacing to the internet is basically identical. So all these are surfacing essentially an application, let's say on port 80. Traffic Manager uses DNS when a client comes in and they attempt to connect to my application. Traffic Manager uses a DNS query to determine which instance of the application is the closest physical to the user. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't do this based on where the user is, because the user queries DNS. It does it based on where the user's configured DNS server is. So you can, if you're not careful and you don't do this well, you can find yourself in a trap. If a user, for example, is sitting in Australia and they're pointing to a DNS server in Europe, according to Traffic Manager, they're sitting in Europe. If they're in Europe using a DNS server in the US, according to Traffic Manager, they're going to be sitting in the US. So it's based on the location of the user's DNS server. Once that's determined, it redirects the user to the closest version of the application. Now, you've got a couple of options available for how you choose to configure this. Whether it's based on just sheer performance, you want to load balance. Whether it's based on which applications or which sites have priority over others, you've got some configuration capability. But at the end of the day, that's the primary function of Traffic Manager. It allows you to make sure that if you have the same application distributed across multiple parts of the world or multiple subscriptions, the user gets to go to the closest one. In addition, if one of those versions or one of those implementations goes down for some reason, Traffic Manager will stop routing users to that location.